Hello and welcome, my erudite friends, to another edition of MonteCristo's Power Rankings, the Thinking Fans Power Rankings. Today, we are going to be looking at Stage 3 of the 2019 of the Overwatch League season after 4 weeks of competition and right before our Atlanta homestand, followed by the stage playoffs. This will be the number 10 through number 1 rankings. Be sure to check out number 20 through number 11 also on my channel. Starting with number 10, and moving down 2 spots are the Houston Outlaws. That loss against the Florida Mayhem really hurts. It really hurts for every reason for Houston. You're coming off the big upset win where you managed to go ahead and take out the San Francisco Shock. And then you're going to come in when you're trying desperately to reach the season playoffs and drop what should have been an easy victory, another point to add into the W column, and that's going to drop you a little bit. I don't think the Outlaws were the most prepared for this match, but that doesn't really matter. Now, this is buffered by some wins against Paris, Washington, and Toronto, but realistically, the Outlaws should have gone 4-0 over this stretch. That's one of the easiest schedules you could possibly imagine during the league, and it does leave them, obviously, with a favorable stage playoff position at 5-2. They are going to be locked into the stage playoffs, but I think ultimately this stage had to be a return to form after an 0-7 stage. If they had gone 6-1, would have almost leveled them out at 50-50 over the last 2 stages and would have greatly helped them get into the overall season playoffs. So that's a bit unfortunate for Houston. I don't really think the Florida loss is reflective of their skill. I think it was probably mostly laziness or cockiness coming up against the Mayhem, but still really unfortunate for the Houston Outlaws, and it makes their task of doing well in the rest of the season a little bit more difficult. That said, they're still going to be a top 10 team. I'm very excited to watch them in the stage playoffs. Dropping 3 spots to number 9 are the Los Angeles Gladiators. I was a bit shaky on the Gladiators even in the last power rankings. Didn't really know precisely where they should fit. But now we've seen them lose to the Shanghai Dragons. They got completely routed by the Vancouver Titans as well, and they took an expected win against the Toronto Defiant. Gladiators, I think, have been a bit of a disappointment this stage. They're going to end 4-3, almost certainly out of the stage playoffs, but they never can seem to take the big wins against the top teams. To me, they feel like a gatekeeper to the top 8, which is why we're going to put them in the 9th position, but 8th or 9th seems about right at this point in time. They're going to be able to demolish the lesser teams. They're going to have their wacky strategies, but it just doesn't feel like it's competitive whenever they play against a team that I would place higher than them in the power rankings. So they're going to drop down a little bit. We'll see what happens in the upcoming stage and whether they can reverse their fortunes. At number 8, up a significant amount, up 6 spots, are the Chengdu Hunters. And you may be curious about this because Chengdu, they went 2-2, so 50% record in the last couple of weeks. But crucially with Chengdu, we have to look at their opponents. They played a really competitive game against the Vancouver Titans, and until, in my opinion, they threw that match by putting Jiqiren in and running that terrible offensive Symmetra strategy on Havana attack, I feel like they had a really good chance of tying up that series and maybe even pushing it to map 5 and a victory. They came out a couple days later, destroyed the Dallas Fuel, and then, most shockingly of all, they defeated the San Francisco Shock. So coming into that series, Chengdu looked very confident. And Chengdu played, it seemed like they were playing the DPS comps at the right time. They were playing the Sombra Goats at the right time. They were swapping up their compositions when they needed to in the match. And they looked really solid. Then they took a big loss against the Seoul Dynasty. So this team does seem to be a bit feast or famine. They're 3-4. They're not going to be ultimately in those stage playoffs. But I think in the last couple weeks, they've shown that they can really hang with the best of them. Now, I do anticipate the Chengdu Hunters to go down again pretty quickly, to be honest. I'm not sure they have this kind of staying power, but that Shock upset and the competitive game against Vancouver were compelling enough. And considering 3 of their 4 opponents were in the top 8 here as well, And they won one of those matches, and they absolutely beat down the Dallas Fuel, who we see in the bottom half of the rankings. It seems fair to move them into the 8th, 9th position. At 7th, dropping one spot since our last power rankings, are the Shanghai Dragons. Shanghai took the win against Gladiators. Seems reasonable enough for them. But this is a team, especially when we look at the game against the Guangzhou Charge, they dropped a map there. This is a team that doesn't seem to be quite as ahead of the curve anymore. And so going 1-1, maybe they don't deserve to be dropped a slot. I still think they're a top 8 team, but they don't have that surprise factor of being so excellent on the Sombra Goats when they were one of the only teams running it all the time that we saw last stage. So overall, Shanghai, I fully expect them to be in the stage playoffs, right? It should be easy for them in the coming week to take another victory against Guangzhou, and probably will win against the Philadelphia Fusion as well, which solidifies their placement at 6-1, but they haven't had the hardest opponents this stage, and yeah, they have been less clean in their play, even as they take those wins, and I think more teams are becoming used to playing against the Sombra Goats. Now, of course, they do have probably the best Widowmaker in the league right now. DM has put up some incredibly good Widowmaker games, so if they lean into that, they might be a pretty serious threat into the playoffs. Again, hard to get a read on this team right now because they seem to be in transition away from the Sombra Goats a little bit themselves. Moving up a spot to 6th place are the Seoul Dynasty. Seoul, they had such a competitive game against the Hangzhou Spark, a team that is really on fire right now. Beat Paris as expected, beat Chengdu as expected. This team is delivering even with Fissure gone. I still don't really understand how and when they use their various players. There doesn't seem to be a lot of logic to me from the outside as to when these substitutions occur, but and for that reason, I really don't think this will ever be a team that truly competes for a stage title or the season title, because I think you have to have more stability and build around star players and get that synergy rolling to be competitive at the very elite level here in the Overwatch League. But I think they can be a very good team running the strategies that they have right now, and it's showing in their results. Dropping 3 spots are the San Francisco Shock. What do you say about this last week? Couple weeks? Sure, you got dominant victories against Boston and Florida. Those are expected. Also turned out a pretty good performance against London, but London is a team that continues to slide down the rankings. It's that loss to the Chengdu Hunters. And sometimes the San Francisco Shock, they really just seem like they can't adapt very well. They don't have that ace Sombra player that they're putting in right now. We may see, I would argue we should see Striker take the mantle for the Sombra. Maybe you pull out Choi Hyobin from the lineup and put Striker in as a dedicated Sombra alongside Sinatra and Rascal, your other DPS players. So you have the strength of Sinatra Zarya, because otherwise you're taking Sinatra off the Zarya, and that's just not going to be very effective against Goat's compositions, right? Because you lack a lot of damage if you take that Zarya. You can't penetrate the tankiness and the sustain of a Goat's comp. So I think it limits them in game a little bit. I would like to see somebody play that dedicated Sombra role in the team. They have enough players on the bench. Certainly the Shock should be able to pull something like this off. But until that happens, them going back to the Batiste Goats, sure, it's a Shock specialty, but it's hard to play into Sombra Goats because Sombra can hack the invulnerability field, and you don't have that crowd control from the Brigitte in order to control the Sombra in your back line. So Shock, I think they need to mix up their strategies. They're still an excellent team at the strategies they run. I just think their strategies are a bit outmoded here for the end of Stage 3. It feels like the meta has kind of passed them by. Obviously, that gets fixed. They're still going to be a stage contender. And here's another big mover. The Los Angeles Valiant, up to 4th place, up a whopping 6 spots. I rarely move teams up or down 6 spots. Did it with the Hunters, doing it again with the Valiant. Reason being, Valiant played the Spark extremely close. They took out the Shanghai Dragons. They took out the Vancouver Titans, and it didn't even have to go to map 5, and they utterly destroyed the London Spitfire. This team might be better than 4th place, honestly. There's a debate to be had whether this team is maybe as good as 1st place in the league, legitimately. I feel like the top 4 slots right now are all very close together. Top 5, really. We consider the San Francisco Shock. And it feels like any team in these top 5 could potentially take the stage crown. I mean, the Valiant, they've got everything going for them right now. You look at what Packington, their coach, has done with this roster. We're finally seeing agilities back on the Pharah. We're seeing them make DPS compositions. We're seeing them be excellent at GOATs. So this is a team that has a lot of heat behind them right now, and it's hard to tell whether they should be 4th or even better. The Hangzhou Spark up 1 spot to the 3rd position. Another team, you could make an argument that due to their hot streak recently, could be better than the NYXL. NYXL has had a pretty weak strength of schedule. But for now, the Hangzhou Spark are going to be there at the 3rd position. Played a pretty close game with the Seoul Dynasty and the Valiant, but still came out victorious. For me, the Hangzhou Spark, they still need to show us that they are getting better at attacking on assault maps. Their set plays on hybrid and assault continue to be a point of weakness. Some people might say, well, Monty, in their last match on hybrid, they just completely destroyed the map record against the Florida Mayhem. Didn't destroy, just beat it by 1 second. But they did set a new map record on Eichenwald. My argument would be many of those Florida players, DPI and Gargoyle, that was the first time they've been on the stage. They've had a week to integrate with their teams, so don't read too much into it. Hangzhou Spark, if they can get the control together, not the control, the assault and the hybrid together, those control points on attack, that is the key to their victory. The other thing the Spark need to do is have a better team fight win rate when they lose a player first. They're sort of middle of the pack right now, but elite teams in this league normally can lose a player first and still win a team fight 20 to 30% of the time. That's where they need to get, and I think the Hangzhou Spark are going to be potentially the best team in the Overwatch League. Might deserve to be a little bit higher, but until we see just a little bit more, we'll keep them there at number 3. Moving up a spot are the NYXL to number 2. NYXL arguably haven't had the toughest opponents, and we did see them go to 2 map 5s, but they also pulled out the victory on those map 5s in the end. Dallas was trying to snipe them with a niche strategy. NYXL adapted and won. London probably played their best match of the last 2 weeks against the NYXL, but again, New York pulls it out in map 5. So considering they've gone 2-0, that's going to be pretty good. And also, we fully expect for them to beat Toronto and Florida Mayhem in the Atlanta homestand weekend. So we're looking at a team that's 7-0 in the stage. You can play maps close, you can play matches close, but as long as you're coming out with the wins, that's what matters. You could make a strong argument the NYXL have not been tested that much this stage because of their weak strength of schedule, but they have some quality wins, a couple against London, one against the Outlaws, that keep them in this position. Map differential not great, but they're still putting the W's on the board. And still at number 1 are the Vancouver Titans. You might be skeptical. You might say, why are Vancouver at number 1? Well, part of that was they have had some quality wins against Chengdu and the Gladiators, in spite of the upset loss against the Valiant. But it really takes more evidence to dethrone that number 1 team than what we saw against the Valiant. Besides that match, especially if we look at the Gladiators game that we saw Vancouver play the next week, they started to play Stitch, which I think is a better fit for the current meta. So they took the time when they only had the 1 match to prepare for in week 4, and put it to good use by adding Stitch back into the roster. Stitch, I think, is going to be a stronger player in a Sombra-focused meta, and also they looked mad, completely destroyed the Gladiators 4-0, and those maps didn't really look close either. So the ending of the streak is unfortunate for the Titans, but I think in the long run, that 1 loss is not going to be particularly impactful for them. They have ended 6-1. They're either going to be the 1st or 2nd seed, most likely 2nd, because we expect New York to go 7-0, but still going to be a huge threat in the playoffs, and we need to see more weakness outside of just a single match, I think, for us to move them down any further. So thank you, of course, for joining me once again for the MonteCristo Overwatch League Power Rankings. We'll be seeing you once again in Stage 4.